Our guest speaker today is Antoine Kremer, so I think I don't need to introduce Antoine to this audience. So Antoine is now emeritus and is still active at INRA Biogeco in Bordeaux. Has very important contribution to forest genetic and has been one of the main engine, I would say, of forest genetic in Europe. But I would particularly like to single out a series of papers he did in 2003 with the first paper with Valérie Lecor on basically the differentiation we should expect to see at quantitative traits. So it was really a study which makes a bridge between population genetics and quantitative traits, and a series of studies which has had a vast impact beyond forest genetic, and in particular is hotly disputed these days in human genetics. So without much ado, please, Antoine.
For the introduction, thank you also for the organizers for inviting me to give a talk today. Particularly at a time where the European Union is quite often criticized by some, I'm happy to emphasize here how much the EU has contributed to research, and especially in forestry research. So, and I guess this will be shown today as well, because this project was supported by the European Union. So, I will be talking today about genetic changes that we can see or predict at reasonable time scale, at, so to say, contemporary time scales. These are, of course, major questions. One of the major questions we are raising these days is there actually evolution going on in natural forest, given that there is important and very important environmental change. And if there is evolution going on, which are the threats that are actually changing, that we see changing? And an additional question is, do we see differences regarding changes in different species? I'm taking as an example, of course, oaks, which are my familiar species I'm working with. So we know that there are changes, at least as a phenotypic level. For example, we know that growth is continuously increasing. Trees have never grown as much as they do today. If you compare growth rates between today and about a few decades ago, the growth it's much larger, and it's still going on. This is the results of a very European scale survey showing that growth is still increasing, and the predictions are that this is going on for the next several decades. Another threat that is changing, at least at the phenotypic level, is the time of bud burst. For example, in the case of oaks, we know that if there's a spring temperature increase of 1 degree, the date of bud burst would be shifted by 7 days. And this is the case. I'm just recalling here some of the experimental results where the date of bud burst here is plotted as a mean spring temperature. Another threat that is currently changing is seed crop. We have been monitoring seed crop across France for 2 decades in oak stands, and there's a clear trend towards more seed crop. So these are all phenotypic changes that we can see in natura. But do these phenotypic changes correspond also to genetic changes, or are they just plastic responses? which can be translated in a different way. Actually, are these trends that we see, are those really adaptive or not? And maybe there are other threats that we don't see that are actually shifting. So all these questions invite us to examine in very details various traits of the phenotype of a tree and see if we can detect any phenotypic and particularly genetic change. So, and to do this, of course, you have to place yourself in a spatio-temporal context, okay? And the context that I will consider here is the time separating two generations from generation 1 to generation 2 down here. And I'm taking the example of oaks. You could take also other example of beech, etc. Most of European species are still naturally regenerated, and in most cases, not always, but in most cases under even age regimes. Under even age regime, I'm just recalling some of the features of even age regimes. Under even age regimes, you have an adult stand here that is underwent a seed cut. The trees reproduce, produce a new generation, very dense, and then there's a series of either natural selection in the early stages, this is the age scale here, and then human thinning intervention, and then you come to the next generation. Very important to outline here is the extreme demographic decrease in the early stages. As you can see here, the first generation, you may have up to 1 million, sometimes up to 1 million trees per hectare. And in 20 years, you'd reduce it by 95%. So most of the selection, and this is all natural selection, up to 10, 20 years. So most of the selection is actually going in the early stages. Okay? So this is the reason why the time scale that I will be addressing in my talk will be from, let's say, age 0 to about 20, 30 years. So how can we predict or how can we estimate genetic changes? Well, I'm just recalling here some standard quantitative genetics. When is a threat actually changing over generations? Well, there are 3 requirements that the threat will actually be changing. Of course, the threat has to be variable. The threat has to undergo some kind of evolutionary process. It can be drift, can be, but in our case, we will consider selection. And of course, the threat has to be heritable. So any change due to variation in the first generation will actually then be transmitted to the next generation. Then you will see a shift from one generation to the next. This is standard quantitative genetics that breeders are using. But this is under artificial selection, under culling selection. And in Natura, we don't know how much actually the natural selection is exerting at G1. But there are ways of overcoming these difficulties. Indeed, if you consider the 2 first conditions, what does that mean? If the threat is variable in generation 1, and if it's undergoing some kind of selection, then it should be correlated to fitness. So if we can measure fitness, then we have both access to the variation and to if the threat is actually undergoing selection. And the 2 other conditions actually can also be translated into this correlation has a genetic component. So if a threat is correlated to fitness, and if this correlation is actually supported by genetic effects, then you can predict any genetic change. But in addition, you see this correlation here with fitness. Of course, you need variation of fitness. If there's no variation of fitness, and particularly variation at the genetic level, there will be no evolution. So that's the 3rd condition. So if we have access to these 3 conditions here, we can make some predictions of evolutionary change. Now, they may look complicated, these covariances and this variance of fitness, but they be translated in more easier terms to understand. The first term, which is the covariance between the threat and fitness, is just a difference between the trees that have been selected by natural selection and the mean of the population. So just a selection differential as we are used to in quantitative genetics and breeding. The second term is actually what we are looking at. The second covariance, the genetic covariance, is just a difference between the response after, if these trees that have been selected by natural selection reproduce to the next generation, and if this is the mean value at the next generation, then this shift here is exactly equal to this covariance. So if we can estimate this covariance, then we have an idea of this difference of the shift. And the last term, which is very important, otherwise there will be no change at all, is that the fitness has to be variable at the genetic level. And in this case, the variance actually of fitness is equal to the difference in fitness between generation 2 and generation 1. Okay, so here we have a theoretical frame that will allow us to estimate evolutionary changes in natural population. So let's go to a study case. We have been investigated and trying to estimate these parameters in Natura, in a stand that we are following since about 30 years, where we have the two generations here. Generation G1, the adult trees, the oak trees here. This was about 30 years ago. So these oak trees reproduce naturally and produce the next generation that is shown here, a picture taken in 2014. These trees were about 100 years old. And when we started to study the second generation, they were in between 15 to 26 years old. We did a study sampling. Actually, it's a mixed stand where there are two oak species. This is the picture of the previous stand that we saw of the adult trees. And we sampled, well, it was an exhaustive sampling of all the adult trees. In the next generation, the generation was extremely dense. We did systematic sampling of about 250 offsprings, one offspring every 3 to 6 meters. So let's start with fitness. As I indicated, if we don't have any variation, genetic variant for fitness, there will be no possibility for evolution. So how can you estimate fitness? Well, we have generation 1 here and generation 2. To estimate fitness, we should be able to estimate the lifetime reproductive success. Okay, so from 1 to age 100 at the next generation. Of course, we only go to 30 years, so actually we estimated we measured actually, for each adult tree, the number of offspring he produced by doing a parentage analysis using SNPs. And this took into account the spatial distribution and the border effects. Etienne helped us to use this model to estimate the reproductive success of each adult tree. That means it took into account the fecundity of the adult trees and, of course, the survival after 26 years. So after 26 years, survival after 26 years, the trees went all through the early selection during the early stages of the population. So we think this is a rather good estimate, actually, of fitness. So here's, for example, an illustration of the reproductive success of this adult tree in yellow here, I don't know, no, in red here. This is the adult tree. And the green dots nearby are all the offsprings he produced, either as female parent or as male parent. You can see some of quite far away, probably due to the male contribution. And these are the variation of the reproductive success. There's more on average reproductive success for Petrea than for Robur. These circles indicate the size of the reproductive success for each adult tree. But most important, there's quite an important variation of the genetic variance of fitness. There's 2 times more genetic variance for Petrea than there is for Robur. Okay? Actually, for Robur, it's called this is the standard error of the additive variance, you see it's almost close, not significantly different from 0. So I show represented here the distribution of where the additive variance of fitness is located in comparison to a survey that was recently published in other species. And you can see that Petrea is at the extreme tail of the distribution, and Robur is much closer to the mean values in comparison to other species. So to sum up the data about the demographic and about the reproductive success and fitness, we can see that Robur has a much lower reproductive success on the one hand, and has also lower genetic variance. So actually this explains why Robur is actually undergoing a decline demographically. This is the distribution of the two species in red Petrea from G1 to G2. G2 has dramatically increased in size and in demography over one generation due to the differences in reproductive success and also the genetic variance, difference of the genetic variance of fitness. So now we know there is, at least for Petrea, there is genetic variance for fitness. So our basic question is still now, which trait is related to fitness? And that shows changes. So we try to estimate and it's correlated to fitness at the genetic level as well. So we had to access genetic values of fitness and of the traits in natura in G1. So you need the phenotypic values of the traits, and of course you need to estimate genetic relatedness between the trees. So we use a set of 15,000 SNPs that came from a genomic capture to estimate realized genomic relatedness, and then use standard quantitative genetic models to estimate the covariance between the genetic value of the traits and the genetic value of fitness. Well, this, just to recall, this is the distribution, for example, of genotypic relatedness within Petrea with about 50,000 SNPs. You can see that most of the relatedness has a skewed distribution close to 0, but when you make a close-up of the tail, the extreme tail, which is shown here, this is a close-up just of this part here, and you can see that some of the genetic relatedness are close to 0.4, 0.6, 0.2, so there are some full SIPs, half SIPs available in natura. This is very important. The method works very well if you have a large variation of related in natura. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. This is, for example, the case in Robur. You have less variance of genetic relatedness, which makes it not possible to estimate very well the genetic shifts from one generation to the next. But anyway, let's come to the results. So we did a whole scanning of the phenotypes of the adult trees. About 56 traits were assessed. And I'm just showing here the different categories of traits, or growth traits, about 4 traits for growth. Phenology, 6 traits, not only bud burst, but leaf senescence and phenology of flower flushing, etc., etc. Physiology, resilience, structure, leaf morphology, and defense. We assessed the secondary metabolic compound. So the question is, which of these traits are actually changing, or do we predict any changes from one generation to the next? This is just to explain resilience, but I won't have time to do it. Now, there are 2 slides that summarize the results. These are the traits for which we could detect any changes, statistically. Okay. So growth, all growth traits show a clear genetic shift towards more growth. Physiology, larger leaves and thicker leaves. All the traits that were related, for example, to water metabolism, no change. We'll come to this later. Leaf morphology. There was a clear shift for leaf morphology, but in what sense? In Petrea, it was actually leaf threads that diagnostic of Petrea. That means that selection is actually going on towards more Petrea-like trees in Petrea and towards more Rebours-like trees in Rebours, which is expected given that the admixed or intermediate phenotypes are generally eliminated during the development of the stand. And surprisingly, defense, 11 of the secondary metabolic compounds exhibited some predicted genetic changes. So 21 threads show some predicted changes. Here are some figures to illustrate this, at least the selection differential or the selection gradient for growth. This is the fitness here, represented as a circumference, as a function of circumference in Petrea, and I think in Rebours as well, just to illustrate this. Now, no changes. Phenology. No thread did show any predicted changes. Physiology. For example, the threads that we expected that would express some changes, threads related to water metabolism, for example, the carbon isotope discrimination, no changes. Resilience didn't exhibit any changes, and wood density, no changes at all. An illustration for phenology, this is the variation, the fitness here, plotted as a function of bud burst here, scored with a different scoring system. Don't see any change in Petrea, very minor changes in Rebours. So, these were predicted changes, predicted based on genetic parameters estimated at G1, at one generation. So how can we be confident to do this prediction? Can we validate it? Well, as I indicated, we have also access to a second generation. So we could validate, for example, if we estimate the breeding value in G1 in G2. Do we see a shift of the breeding values from generation 1 to generation 2? So to do this, to estimate the breeding value, we have now to use genetic relatedness over the two generations, not only within generation G1 as we had earlier, but since we did a parentage analysis, we know the SIP-SIP relationship in G2, and we know the parent-offspring relationship. So we have a complete matrix of relatedness over the two generations. And for a few threads, we had also assessments in G2. Of course, this was G2 at age 24, and here we had phenotypes at age 100. But by using a linear model that takes this into account, and I'm just showing the results here. This is, for example, for Petrea, the mean values, the breeding values of G2 in comparison to G1, you have indeed an increase. In height is not as clear. In Rebours, both for the circumference and height, you have indeed a shift towards more growth observed by the breeding values in G2 in comparison to G1, as predicted by the quantitative genetics in G1. We use the second method to validate this. It's a very empirical system. In other words, we'd like to see if in G2 we see indeed a shift as predicted by quantitative genetics, as I indicated earlier. To do so, we subdivided our trees in G1 according to two categories, trees with higher fitness and trees with lower fitness, based on the reproductive success. Then we checked how, for example, the trees with higher fitness, what was the phenotypic score assessment of their offspring in comparison to the trees that had lower fitness. If the trees that had higher fitness in G1 had their offsprings also with higher phenotypes, then that trees would actually, that trait would actually be shifting in the next generation. And this is what we did, for example, in Quercus Petrea. For all the traits for which there was a significant quantitative prediction in G1, these are the predicted genetic response for circumference and height between G1 and G2. And this is the observed phenotypic response in G2 when we compare the mean values of the trees that had higher fitness with the trees that had lower fitness. And you see the same sign, at least, except for the specific leaf area where there was a shift. But for all other opposite shift, for all other threats, the response based on the empirical method was of the similar sign than the predicted response by quantitative genetics. So, to conclude, we've shown that there is some constrained evolution. There's a clear different trend of evolution in Petrea and Robur. Robur is actually undergoing a demographic decline based on the estimation of overall reproductive success and also of the variance of fitness. There's evidence of evolutionary changes at contemporary timescales, but there are some unexpected responses, particularly, for example, for phenology and for threats related to water metabolism where we did not see any changes. In natura predictions are possible. Well, it needs a lot of resources and time. There are also some biological and technical limitations, which I didn't have time to talk about. That biological limitation, it all depends on the level of the variation of relatedness in your population, and you cannot do much about that. Technical limitation, of course, there might be common environmental effects between adults and offsprings, and this need to be investigated. Well, this is all introduced in the model of estimation. I'd like to thank some of the people that contributed to this work. As you've seen, this work was going on since about 30 years since we started in Petit-Charny-Stans, but there are some of the people that I would very much acknowledge for their contribution, which is Hermine Alexandre. Hermine did most of the quantitative genetic work that I showed here. Alexis Ducousseau and Laura Truffaut organized all the phenotypic assessments in the stand. Etienne developed, and we used this method to estimate reproductive success and fitness. Émilie Chancerelle did the parentage analysis, and Isabelle Le Sur developed the genomic capture to estimate the genetic relatedness. And again, this was all supported by the EU over the years. Thank you very much for your attention.
So we have 10 minutes for questions. So Tanya?
Hi, I'm Tanya Pyhäri from University of Oulu, Finland. And I wanted to ask a question about this decrease trend in the secondary compounds. So do you think that there is a trade-off with the growth? And could that trend be reversed in a year when you have a lot of herbivore or pathogen pressure?
I think the environment, the condition that we see must have some impact on the pathogen or insect communities. And that would have some impact on selection in the early stages. On a very different experiment I did not talk about, I'm currently looking at genetic changes over a slightly longer time period since the Little Ice Age. Okay, so there are still some very old oak trees in France that experienced the Little Ice Age some 300 years ago. So we look at their offsprings and compare their offsprings with today. And we also analyzed some of those compounds. And those compounds, it also show dramatic changes. So I think this has to do, probably the extreme cold that existed some winters during the Little Ice Age changed dramatically the communities of insects and pathogens, and the result had different selection pressures on the tree. But it's striking to see that in two different experiments, we see a similar signature. There's more biotic, apparently, interaction going on than abiotic. So to say, at least this is what these results show. Well, the secondary compounds in the case of oaks were mostly tannins, very different compounds of tannins. Wood, secondary compounds of the wood, not of the leaves, of the wood.
Sandra Avignon, so thanks for this nice talk. Could you check that those traits that were not predicted to change based on selection gradients, like phenology, actually did not change between the G2 and G1 generation? And you have some explanation for why these traits apparently don't shift?
Well, I looked, okay, the selection gradient was not significant, but the trend is there. Okay, it's just towards earliness. Okay, but it's not significant, both in Petrea and Robur. Okay, and when you look at in detail in the selection gradient, but it was not significant, so it didn't mention. But still, there is a trend there. Okay, I think we did not do it. The reason is that it was not measured the same way in the adult trees. In the adult trees, you use scores. And in the juveniles, in the G2, we use the date of bud burst. So, and this is so different that, I mean, in the model that you use, wouldn't work.
So why doesn't it?
We didn't do it. So.
And why doesn't it change? Because you would expect.
I think since, so this G2 existed since 89, 90, up to today. There was not, we checked in the meteorological data, climatic data, there was no dramatic occurrence of a late frost during that period. So that might be the reason, okay? But we also checked, for example, I think I have a slide on that. We measured also water availability in the soil over that period, but there was more dryness during since 1990. Than earlier, but still, for example, for water-related threats, we didn't see any shift.
Caroline Scotti, NRAE Avignon. I was wondering if there are some hybrid and if the fitness is better than for the parent.
Well, we excluded. There were in the G1 there were about 21 admixed. So at the beginning, we were trying to consider 3 different cohorts, the 2 parental species and the admixed, but they were not in numbers sufficient to do it, okay? But the results show in Petrea and Robur that actually admixed are counter-selected, okay? This is the reason why in Petrea, the shift in of the morphological traits indicate that selection is going towards more Petrea-like trees, as I indicated, than other ones. And in Robur, more Robur-like, which means that the admixed are eliminated.
The Darius from Vytautas Magnus University in Lithuania. My question would be how you would comment dormancy issues like chilling requirement and this dormancy transition, and maybe some comments about hybrids between Petrea and Robur. Have you noted in your stance possibility or facts of hybridization based on morphology? So this double question, sorry.
Okay. Now we did not consider dormancy requirements in this. We just measured the timing of bud burst and the timing of leaf senescence. Now concerning the hybrids, there are hybrids. In the adults, as I indicated, about 20. There are a few hundreds in the offsprings. But these were not sufficient to estimate genetic parameters. So this cohort of the hybrids, both in G1 and G2, is excluded of the analysis. We did not consider it.
Santiago González from INVA Bordeaux. Antoine, given that the significant selection gradients, they are so tiny, do you think that they are still relevant for adaptation, like to climate change? Or?
I think, well, when you compare this study with other studies doing in natural unstructured population, our sample sizes are too small. So we don't have enough power to detect the changes. There are changes there. And we need much larger sample sizes. I mean, I used a traditional, what we called a few years ago, ISP, intensive study plots, when we started to work on mating designs and reproduction and gene flow. But these plots that we use for those purposes are not large enough for this kind of investigation. One of the major limitations here was the sample size. you need a few hundreds, maybe 1,000 of adult trees, okay, to have a better estimate. Okay, and in this case, we probably will detect more changes, slightly changes.
Thank you. Jose Ramirez Valiente from INEA Madrid. So I was wondering how you could compare the G1 and G2 in terms of growth. So did you standardize by age or something? Because you know
we introduced in the linear model a fixed effect of generations. Okay. To remove what is due, so this removes both the difference of age and also the difference of there were still some changes of environment from some years. Okay, but there was enough connectedness, genetic connectedness between the two generations to still estimate the breeding values in the two generations. Okay, but the generation effect due to environmental effects was removed by introducing a fixed effect in the model due to generation.
Okay, thank you, Antoine.
I'm Egbert Burger from Luke in Finland. What do these results mean for breeding? If we want to help to breed sustainable crops for the future, how should we breed in these oak species?
Well. Well, it all depends what purpose. Probably there's if you raise your material in let's say in controlled environments, etc., you may be able to detect, for example, traits that or genetic variation for traits that are related to better adaptation to drought condition, and then you use. This study was all conducted in situ, in natura. There is huge environmental variance, okay? But this environmental variance may be so high that you don't see the response of, for example, drought-related nets. Whereas in breeding population, okay, where you breed in controlled environments, you may be much better able to detect those and breed. So. If you do breeding, you don't use natural regeneration. You are in a completely different system. Okay? So you may still use these threats that didn't show any response here in breeding operation.
Catherine Bastien, INRAE. I would like to question the number of generation and evolution across generation, because here you present result in one generation between G1 and G2. And what is interesting for us also as a process is not only to consider gain or evolution in one generation, but also to have a trend of this evolution and impact of natural selection over generation. Do you have an idea, because we are limited in our investigation, of course, to be able to have a validation of results over generation, how we could, as scientists, gain in this answer across generation?
Well, there are there may be different experiments to evaluate this. The first one would be to do some experiments with selection, but you need, trees that have a short generation time, but you may raise yourself by mixing different genotypes in controlled environment, make some experimental selection, as is done with plants also. There might be also maybe another way to do it would be, especially in conifer, where seed can be stored. You may use some of what they call resurrection experiments. I think if you look at the seed banks of conifers, you would probably find for some species seed that were stored more than 100 years ago. Okay? And so you could compare, if you know where they are coming from, which populations, etc. You could compare this old material with, so in this case, you would overlap maybe 3 or 4 or 5 generations. So at least experimentally, there are different ways. We are not used to. We are used to use the provenance test and common garden experiments. But I think there are other resources available in trees that may help to understand what is actually going on in current evolution. And this, in conifers, I'm pretty sure one can do some of this restoration experiments, and also start from some species that have very short generation times. I mean, in Betula or in Eucalyptus, I don't know, Poplars or whatever, you maybe conduct experimental selection.
Thank you, Antoine.